how to help them on my show, Mental Melodies.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Mental Melodies. I'm your host, Carmynn Bradley. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for listening, watching, liking, subscribing, all of those things. Please continue to do all of those things. I've been doing some rebranding, kind of prompted by last week's episode, but also a lot of other things. And what I wanted to start off this week's episode talking about actually was the shooting downtown at UNLV. And part of the reason is because I was sort of stuck in this moment of, I didn't know how to respond to it. I didn't know if I had a place to like say something on social media. I didn't know if I should get on Mental Melodies talk show Instagram and do something about it there. And so I sort of thought that sitting on it until this episode would be a good idea because something I've noticed about when things like that happen, like when my brother was killed, is that there's a lot of response from people right after something like that happens, and then it completely dies down. And I know for the people who died or who lost somebody or who were about to go on campus or who were on campus, all of those things are still happening for them now. And I feel that we do not respond the right way to these things, like as a country. And I think maybe I'm overinflating like my importance as somebody with a voice, but I was trying to think of how I could respond in a way that could help, and I felt very limited. I noticed that the Healing Center, which is actually where I did my student internship, and then I started my internship as a therapist. That's where I did it at, was at the Healing Center, and they are giving away free therapy, crisis intervention therapy. And I was really touched by that. And I was feeling this sense of guilt because I walked away from that, and I can't give away free therapy now because I am not like under the state, all of these things. And I go back and forth about whether or not I should go back to it, and I've talked about how I've switched careers multiple times throughout my life. And I know that it was a good step for me to take, but I felt guilty. I really did that I couldn't help in that way. But I do think that I can help in the sense that I can spread the word about things and like continue to keep the conversation up because, like I said, the conversation dies too soon after things like this happen. And I know that UNLV was shut down, and I think that that was a great response, and I can understand why things are isolated, but it feels. Perhaps it's because it was so close to home, so close to where we're at, so close to where I'm at that I felt it differently than I would when when stuff happens in Florida or in Texas or something like that. I was suddenly feeling like, oh wow, I feel like there should be like a countrywide response to these things, and it doesn't matter that only three people died and it wasn't like a whole thing. Um, that doesn't matter. It just doesn't. And I think that every single instance like these, I don't know, should be met with a response that matches the gravity of it. That's kind of like my take on that situation. What I wanted to do definitely was make sure that people who are watching knew about the Healing Center and those crisis intervention opportunities, and so please share and talk about that. If you have somebody that you know needs that crisis intervention, please let them know. The office is located down on Pecos, but most of the therapy done through the Healing Center is virtual, which means it's really easy to do because all you have to do is log into your phone or your iPad and meet with somebody. I don't know how long they're giving this therapy away, but please look into it if you need it. And what I was thinking about with regard to that is how important it is to get the therapy right after something happens. And I've talked about this before, how I went through a lot of traumatic stuff in my high school years, and then I tried to go into therapy essentially right after that happened, and I was unsuccessful at that because I was a very young adult kid, trying to live life. But I know that had I been in like effective group therapy or just effective one-on-one therapy right out of high school, that things would have probably been different for me. I wasn't ready. All of that stuff is very true. But what the risk in not getting it right away is that I believe that's when PTSD starts to develop. Because if traumatic things happen to you and you don't process them, they get stuck in your body. And this is something I've talked about over and over and over again, about how those negative emotions essentially they lead to disease, right? Or mental illness. But those things are all connected, right? Your mental and your physical health. So, yeah, it's very pertinent that you are able to process and talk about what's happening right when it's happening. Something that I brought up last week was about, I guess, my childhood and my upbringing and being in this cycle of violence. And I mentioned how it affected my brother. And so I guess if you're tuning in this week and you didn't catch last week's, then you might be a little bit confused. But essentially, I grew up in a very abusive household. My stepfather was a very controlling person, and I witnessed a lot of violence in my household, and some of the violence was enacted upon me, which I shared last week. But I have a lot of memories of my mom being hurt and of my brother being hurt and my sister, and then some stories I heard from my sister after I went to college, things that happened. And the interesting thing about being in a situation like that is that the interventions obviously didn't do much for the situation because we were in it until we grew up and we had to leave. And I feel this sense of, I don't know, I think it's all tied into like how I'm feeling about the shooting. And then the fact that I talked about this last week is that I guess the topic I wanted to bring up today was about cycles of violence and how essentially we just keep repeating the same things over and over again, right? So just because something was okay because your grandpa did it, then it's okay for your dad to do it, and then it's okay for you to do it. And so what I was saying about my brother last week was that he was kind of pushed into a very violent lifestyle. And I always believed that it was because of the environment. You know, you're a product of your environment. And you could say that that's a theory. I believe that for me, it's truth. I watched what happened to my brother. I watched him go through mental illness struggles before those struggles ever hit me. And that is a common thing in families, is that if one person begins to struggle, and specifically if they begin to struggle with like suicidal thoughts or if they have attempts on their life, then that the chances of somebody else in the family experiencing that thing or attempting to take their own life skyrocket. And that's always been a very interesting story for me, because a lot of the struggle that I remember going through in college had to do with what was happening still at home, where my mom was kind of out of the situation, but my siblings were still there because my stepfather is their dad. And so there were things that I was hearing about what was happening to my siblings, and I was very, very frustrated about it. And last week I talked about how I had to go into the court system, and I wasn't necessarily trying to enact like revenge or justice on anybody. I just felt that it was my duty to tell the truth. And so I guess that ties into now feeling like a sense of responsibility for like responding to the shootings. And I don't know what the solution is, and I'm not a politician, and this show is not a political show. But I do know that there's something wrong, obviously, because these things wouldn't continue to happen if things were going well. But I think that the root of the issue must be, or at least it's a theory of mine, must come from family situations. That if you grow up in a household where you feel loved and accepted, and you don't have to fear for your safety, emotional or physical or otherwise at home, then you're not going to go out and try to hurt other people. I've heard rumors about who it was and why it happened, but I don't think that's necessarily relevant to what I'm saying today. But essentially, I did I did just want to reiterate that. And I think what it comes down to on like a micro basis is how parents are handling their emotions with their kids. And I'm watching like my little sister, she has two kids and one on the way. And she is definitely actively breaking these cycles by examining how her anger comes up with her kids and being able to be patient. And I'm watching these things break, and I think that's really, really awesome. And I do think that my generation specifically has begun a lot of these really good things. Like gentle parenting is kind of a term that's being thrown around, and I definitely agree with it. And I know the struggle, and I think the struggle comes from the fact that you learned to do it the opposite way when you grew up. And I'm overgeneralizing, but I think it's true for many people that gentle parenting wasn't something that anybody was thinking about before people thought about it, you know. um, but on the flip side, I just got this like glimmer of hope. And I think that's what I'm always trying to do is not, I'm not trying to like bring up the bad and then say like our world is bad and we're headed toward destruction. And I think that's often what happens when like something like this shooting happens. People are just like, we're the worst, America's the worst, and people, other countries are looking at us a certain way, and we can't get a hold on this situation, and we can't figure out, like, is it guns or is it people, or what is it, and what does this world need? And I think that's where I go in my head, is I'm like, again, what can I do? I can't, like I said, I couldn't give out free therapy. I didn't know how I could give back. And so I was just kind of like sitting there doing nothing, being that like innocent bystander, not helping at all. And that's an interesting concept that I don't know, just thinking about whether or not any of us have a responsibility to do something that isn't affecting us personally, you know? And I guess that comes down to like personal choice, you know. I genuinely feel that I want to help break certain cycles in our world, in our society, in our country, and so I feel compelled to talk about them and to express these opinions about these things, especially because, like I said, I feel like they happen. Like the shooting in Las Vegas is just an example of, let me give you a metaphor. I really like How I Met Your Mother, and there's this one episode that's called, I think it's called The Chain of Screaming, but at least that's like what's being talked about in the episode. And the premise of it is that when you get yelled at work, then you feel all triggered by that. And I can attest to like when people are angry at me, my anger gets really, really triggered, and it's really, really hard to control. So you get yelled at, you're feeling a certain type of way, you take that energy home, you yell at your wife or your husband or your kids or whoever, and it's just this thing that you can't control. And I talked about anger last week and how it really is like a fire, and there's this balance where you can't not address your anger, because again, that leads to things like PTSD. But if you can't control it, and if you can't acknowledge that, like taking that fire and throwing it at somebody else is just essentially playing, you know, that game where they throw balls into the audience and you're just bouncing them. That's what people are doing with violence and anger and frustration and irritation. And they're just like flipping people off on the road because they don't know that person. So they don't feel an obligation to treat that person a certain type of way. And I guess in a sense, I don't know if obligated is the right word, but I feel that it's pertinent to like spread kindness and positivity to people in the world, even if you don't know them. I'm going to sing this song for you to end the first segment, and then I'll pick up with all of that in the next segment after the break. This is Emotional Sickness by Phoebe Bridgers, which I wasn't sure how to incorporate it into this talk, but I guess I see why. And a lot of the times the things that I say in an episode, I feel like they were just meant to be said, which I've talked about before. So anyway, Emotional Sickness by Phoebe Bridgers. I hate you for what you did, and I miss you like a little kid. I faked it every time, but that's alright. I can hardly feel anything, I hardly feel anything at all. You gave me 1,500 to see your hypnotherapist. I only went one time, you let it slide. Fell on hard times a year ago, was hoping you would let it go, and you did. I have emotional motion sickness. Somebody roll the windows down. There are no words in the English language. I would scream to drown you out. I'm on the outside looking through. You're throwing rocks around your room, and while you're bleeding on your back in the glass, I was glad that we made it out. I'm sorry that it all went down like it did. I have emotional motion sickness. Somebody roll the windows down. There are no words in the English language. I would scream to drown you out. And why do you sing with an English accent? I guess it's too late to change it now. You know I'm never gonna let you have it, but I will try to drown you out. You said when you met me you were bored. You said when you met me you were bored, and you were in a band when I was born. I have emotional motion sickness. I try to stay clean and live without, but I wanna know what would happen if I surrender to the sound. Surrender to the sound. See you in a couple minutes.
Traditional TV is going away. Hollywood is starting to fade. People are demanding real stories from real people. Our voices are now being heard in our own way. Podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok Live are becoming the norm. Internet TV has now reached the highest demand in human history. Social media shows is now the new media of the century.
Hi, I'm Deacon T with Modern Word Ministries. It's great to be with you today. Just a short little promo for our show. Every Sunday morning we have service, and you can follow us at 10 a.m. Pacific Time on modernwordministries.org. And if you missed us or you want to see some of our older messages, go ahead and check us out on socialmediashows.com every single morning at 9 a.m. It's a great way to kick off your day, get a little bit of the word in you, get something uplifting, get you started off on your way. You know, if you're looking for prayer or you need some help, reach out to us. If you go to our website, again, that's modernwordministries.org, you can interact with me via telephone, via DM, text message, whatever you want. I'll get right back to you. So if you need prayer, you need help, you just need somebody to talk to, Modern Word Ministries is here for you. We are your church in the community. So until you see you next time, be blessed, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the second segment of this episode of Mental Melodies with your host, me, Carmynn Bradley. I'm talking about some fun stuff today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for just listening and giving me the space to express these things. It feels really good for me to be able to talk out loud. I've mentioned on this show, I think I've mentioned, maybe this is one of the things I haven't talked about very much, but I've written thousands and thousands of words in my life. I used to write upwards of 2,000 to 7,000 words in a day. But I wasn't always writing something. Like sometimes I was trying to write a memoir, sometimes it was a story, and sometimes it was just pouring out of me. And I have talked about how a lot of the stuff that I've done in the past has been preparation for this show. And that's like a fate thing. Like some things come to fruition in your control, but also out of your control. And I think there are so many forces that have been bringing me here. But a lot of the stuff that I was writing down were like my observations about, like mental health in schools or mental health in our society. And so now I feel like I am at a space where I'm now saying out loud the stuff that I've been observing. And it grows and changes over time, obviously, in response to things that happen like today. Anyway, something that came up over the break was the lights went out in the studio, and so I just kept talking, and I was observing, and while I was observing, I was still talking, and I did feel like a little bit frazzled, but I was able to kind of hold my response to what happened and continue on my spiel, and it made me think about, for one thing, what I was saying at the beginning of the episode about the Las Vegas shooting and how I felt that way, where I was kind of like observing what happened and not responding. And to some extent, that is not a good thing. In emergency situations, you need to be able to respond like right away. But on the flip side, and in opposites, because I always talk about them, I think it's also a skill, and it has been positive thing for me in my life. So like I've done both. In my last teaching job in California, there was a situation where a fire erupted during a fundraiser when I was coaching cheer, and one of my girls actually did get burned. But I just like immediately went into response mode, and I think it's because I have like a protector in me, so I was able to get the fire extinguisher out and call the right people and get water on her wounds and all of those things without even really thinking about it. I ended up losing my job because of that, but HR kept asking me, questions about how I responded. And what it came down to for me was like, I've never been specifically trained in what to do if one of my students gets burned because we're making crepes or something. So I felt like I did all of the right things. So anyway, that was a situation where I like responded right away to an emergency. But then there were other situations like where things are happening in class where I noticed that I would just observe and I would wait. And I have this part of me where I can do that. Like I can watch things and then I can make a concerted choice about how I'm going to respond. And I think that skill, this is a theory I guess I'm throwing out right now because I'm not really sure, but I think that that's something that most people don't do. So when I go back to what I was saying in the first segment about how like people are just throwing anger out there, like we're driving and we're frantic and we're honking at people and we're flipping people off and just doing it because the world is too big and we can't connect with strangers because there's just too many of us. I think in those situations, people are just responding to their emotions, and they're controlled by their emotions. It's funny because I was thinking about the song I sang, and the song is about a person, right, and feeling like emotionally sick because of this person, and it's similar, I guess, to the vampire song that I sang last week, which I can't remember if I touched on that too much, but I guess it's because there have been people in my life that have made me like emotionally sick. But when I take that concept out of the context of like the relationship meaning of the song, I feel like it applies to the things that I've been saying about how our emotions like get stuck in our body, right? And so when I'm talking about like how PTSD developed, which has been a theme I've brought up on the show a lot, the reason why you need to go to therapy like right after something happens is because you can get emotionally sick, right? And there are there are people who won't. There are people who can go through like what happened on October 1st here in Las Vegas, and then what happened just last week here in Las Vegas. There are people who can experience that and not go to therapy, and they won't get PTSD. And to that, I don't have an answer to. This is something I brought up last week. I don't know why I'm one way and my sister is another way when we grew up in the same environment. That is something that like I've said before, that was one of the things I really wanted to study if I got into a PhD program. It's like, get a bunch of siblings together and study their brains and figure out why they're different. And I just think it's so fascinating. I am just totally nerding out over all of this stuff. So there are some people, like I said, who can go through what happened in Las Vegas and not experience any long-term effects. However, there are some of us, like me, who, for whatever reason, when traumatic stuff happens, our brains must process it differently or something like that. And so I've talked about like that timeline. When you have a traumatic event happen in your life, all of a sudden the traumatic event becomes stronger and you start to have flashbacks. And like I had clients come in who were in a traumatic experience and they were experiencing these PTSD symptoms like almost right after, and they don't always happen right after, which is again why I'm saying is so important. If you went through that, even if there is a chance that you won't develop PTSD, or your cousin or whoever you know that was involved in that or close to that, I still think that it's valuable for you to go process your feelings about it. And especially when you think about the fact that this is something that's not universal, not global. Maybe it is global, but essentially it's the struggle like of our country. And I think when we look back to like the year 2020 and everything that has happened since then, there's been a huge uptick in violence. And it's given people this like power behind certain choices that maybe I don't agree with. That, like I said, I'm not going to like make a political stance today, but I guess I abide by systems that speak about nonviolence. That's like my stance. I studied yogic philosophy. I studied Gandhi's works. I mean, as a teacher, I studied all of those really important documents and speeches and things that were written in jail by people like Martin Luther King Jr. And the gist of all of those is like nonviolence. And I think even the gist of many religions is love, like do unto others what other people would do unto you. And I think that we lose that as a society. And I guess I'm under the stance that I feel like I hope that our world gets to a space where like we wouldn't even need like weapons. And I have this thought about, oh man, now I'm doing it. I'm like, I'm not going to go down that road, and now I'm going down that road. But it's just so interesting to think about these things and to talk about these things, and like how, you know, at the end of 2020 or whenever all that crap was happening, and, you know, there were people who were anti-police and then there were people who were for the police. And it's like, I think we're fighting for the wrong things, you know, and I think the world is going about it the wrong way. And I know plenty of people who, like I went to high school with, who either are policemen now or who wanted to be policemen. And that's this is a little sidebar, but this is a little trick that I do when I'm trying to like connect with strangers. So I was talking about how people just like treat strangers like crap because I don't know why. Because why not? Because you can, because you're angry. People feel like they have a right to their anger or whatever. Or again, they're just not in control of their emotions. A trick that I do is like if I'm walking, Ocean Beach is a good example of a place that has like a high homeless population. When I look at these people, I try to think of like a person in high school I knew that looked like them. And I try to see people as like their inner teenager or their inner child. Because I think when you connect with people in that way, like the friendships I had in high school were not necessarily with people who like liked the same things as me or, you know, thought the same way as me. We were friends because we went to church together, or we did sports together, or we were in choir together or whatever. I guess those are similarities, but I just feel like most of my friends were very different from me. And I loved all of them, and I loved them very, very deeply. And I think that if we we start to build up. What happens in our brain is we have an ego. Ego is such a challenging concept to understand, but we have this ego and it develops throughout childhood, and it has to, because we have to have some way to have some kind of separateness from everybody, because otherwise we won't have an identity and we literally won't know what to do with ourselves. So our ego is developing, and what this continues to do, I believe, like in adulthood, is it begins to be a barrier. And I think there has to be a point, and some people are tossed into it, some people find it, some people never find it, but there should be a point when we psychologically begin to then break that down and begin to like lessen the walls that we have and decide what part of what has developed for me is healthy and what part of what has developed for me is not healthy. But a lot of people just don't think about those things, and so they just continue to be who they are because of like their upbringing. And so anyway, I was talking about like emotional sickness and violence in our country. So I'm going to try and tie that all back after the break. So I'll see you in just a couple of minutes.
Hello, everyone. This is Joseph Skoda with Social Media Shows. Well, I thank all of you for your support through these last several years, and it's been a lot of fun. We've given people a voice they never had before. Now, Social Media Shows is always collaborating with our veterans to help them do things and help out the veterans who are struggling today. And we teamed up with GI Connections, connecting veterans with resources. So please consider helping and donating to this great cause, because we're always doing things for veterans. So GI Connections, Social Media Shows, and you is what makes the world a better place. Once again, Joseph Skoda, proud United States Air Force veteran.
Got Films is a full-service production company that provides motion picture quality content and production services for use in the film and TV industry. Looking for a seasoned crew, high-quality equipment, or other production services for your film, TV, commercial, corporate convention, sports, news, or interview project? Your search stops here. Some of our projects include NASCAR, American Restoration, Pawn Stars, Counting Cars, Top Chef, BattleBots, Forge and Fire, and Street Outlaws. We have also produced over 60 feature films and documentaries. We're ready for all your needs. Whatever your project, whatever your budget, big or small, Got Films got you. GotFilms.com.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the third segment of this episode of Mental Melodies. This is your host, Carmynn Bradley. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for continuing to listen to me while I process things out loud. It is so good for me to have this space. So, like, again, selfishly, just thank you so much. I appreciate it. I am so grateful to be here. So I was talking about your ego and how it develops, and I was thinking about how to tie it again to like the song and the stuff that I've been talking about with PTSD. And I had a thought over the break about parts and memory therapy, which is something that I've brought up in multiple episodes. And it was the main thing that I used as a therapist. And it runs around a working theory of the conscience, of your subconscious, of your brain, of your psyche. It's, to me, kind of rooted in like Jungian psychology, if you know what that is. Like Freud and Carl Jung had these theories about your brain, and it was made up of an ego and I don't remember the exact terminology, but there's usually three, right? And so Carl Jung talks about like the shadow. And so these are the things that you don't acknowledge about yourself, or these can be the traumas that get stuck like in your body. So you think about, again, that literal emotional sickness that happens when you are not able to acknowledge your anger, or, you know, if you don't get the right therapy you needed as a kid or the right parenting you needed as a kid, then you're going to have emotional dysfunctions, and these kind of exist within your shadow. And then you have your ego, which I just talked about, and that's your ability to be a certain person in order to exist in the world. You have to be like, I am this and I do this and I like this, so therefore I feel safe because I can go into a Starbucks and I can say to the people, please give me this coffee and put my name on it. I know who I am. I know that I exist in a bubble that is separate from all of you. And that is so important. And I think it's so important for a world that is so big, which is one of the things that I see as like an issue. It's so big that you have to find things in order to feel like important, you know? And there's one more part of yourself, and this is the persona, I think, and the persona is perhaps who you really are. It doesn't matter. I'm not teaching an English class right now. The point was that in the parts and memory therapy, you can talk to certain parts of yourself. And I believe that there is kind of like, I mentioned this before, that the theory that Patrick Toby says is that your identity is more like a university and there isn't just one central thing. I kind of believe there is one central thing, but I believe that in certain times of your life, different parts of you can be in control. I think that when you are the kind of person, sorry for calling you out, whoever you are, but if you have like road rage or something, in that moment, that's not really like you in control. That's your angry part in control, or your irritated part. Or maybe it's this, I've talked about how you can have different parts of you that kind of start and end in different eras of your life. So I have like a part of me that was very, very intellectual, ambitious, I don't know, all these things in high school where I just like did all of these things, and I kind of, it's not that I never got sick, but it was just like I did what had to be done, and that's like who I was for a certain period of my life. And I can see when my identity starts to change. Like I can go back to college, and I've talked about my period in college where I was trying to be the same person in high school, but it wasn't working. And that was when the things that happened like in high school were catching up to me, right? But I didn't have the awareness or the therapy or the wherewithal to understand why these things were happening. And so essentially I was just living life and trying it. And I love that I got here, because this is one of the things I wanted to bring up today, which is another working theory of mine. I think that life is just like one big experiment. At least that's how I'm trying to see it. Because I think that we get so stuck in how things are supposed to be, what we're supposed to do. We get to a point where 21, we pick a career or whatever, how old you are, and you just do that until you die. And it makes complete sense. And you are, you know, you're told by the people who are giving you career advice that this is what you have to do, and you have to set up a 401k or CalSTRS if you're a teacher, and you have to make sure that you're going to be okay later. And then you live your life now wishing that things were different, and you go day after day. I'm talking about me. Maybe you love this existence. I didn't like it. But I've been in this mode this year where I am just like throwing that all caution to the wind and trusting myself and saying I'm young enough that I don't need to be afraid that I won't have money when I'm 60 or 70 or 80. I don't want to live in fear of what might happen when I'm old. I'm young enough that I should be taking risks to be who I want to be, something I say all the time on this show. Be who I want to be, experience what I want to experience, not like limit myself, because if I get stuck in what's safe, then I'm going to be old and I'm going to regret it. And I know that I will. I had a very beautifully profound experience when I moved to Vegas in 2018, which is another life event I've mentioned a lot. And I lived with my grandfather for a couple of years. And it was one of those things that, again, felt fated in my story. Fated, not fated, like F-A-D-E-D, like fate. Because I was going to move and live with my mom in Idaho. I was living on a boat in Florida, and everything that I was trying to do in Florida to make money wasn't working out. It was actually my younger sister, I mentioned earlier, who is like actively breaking cycles in raising her children. She told me, and it was very astute, I believe these opportunities are not working out for you because you're not meant to be there. And I had already had that feeling like I know I need to leave, but I loved Florida so much. My curls love Florida, my skin loves Florida, but I knew I had to leave. And I was going to go to Idaho, and instead, the day before I left, I was like, I'm going to go live with my grandpa in Vegas. He'd been talking about how they need teachers there, even though I didn't really want to teach, but I just had this feeling, and I literally drove. It took me, I think, 2.5 days to drive from Florida to here, which if you've done that drive before is insanely fast. The last 20 hours I did basically straight, except when I had to stop to get gas. I was exhausted at the end of it. The last hour, I think I was falling asleep. I pulled off the side. I slept for 15 minutes, and then I just finished. And it's interesting because there's this thing I've been talking about it's hard to conceptualize for all of you, but I think it has to do with these bipolar cycles that I've had and the period of time I had in high school. And it's like they get shorter and shorter. So in the 4 years of high school, I was in this giant sprint to the end. And I was just doing everything and doing it really, really well and pretty quickly. And I got to the end. And then it was like, oh. And then I picked myself up, and then it was college, and then it was like another sprint, and then I get to the end and I'm like, oh. And what I'm trying to do in my life is make that not be my reality. I'm trying to be a little bit slower because I don't like that feeling anymore where I'm just going from one thing to the next and I have no time to like sit and reflect, which is again another reason why like this is such a blessing to me. I lost track of my point, so give me a second. I was really thinking about this morning. I guess I'll just lean into the moment, but I was just feeling very, 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 very frazzled. And I really don't like that. And it's basically been my reality for my entire life, but I'm really, really trying to fight that. So I guess now I'm getting back to my point about, just like living life a different way. Why should I live life the way that everybody else lives their life? So what happened is I lived with my grandpa. I lived with him for 2 years and then he died. And I had, when I moved into his house, I had this plan already to leave. I hated Vegas as soon as I got here. I had been here multiple times because my grandparents lived here, but I was just like, this is not where I'm meant to be. Like, there's no trees. It's so dry. Just like hating it. I was waking up in a panic too because it was one of those periods like before I got that autonomy. This is something I've talked about on the show. That it was like after I moved to Vegas when I decided like, okay, I'm gonna figure out how to be in control of the steps I'm taking instead of just being like, my life has been very like raging waters where it's like, I'm like, it's smooth waters and then all of a sudden I get like tossed into something else. And that even happened this year, even though I've been in more control. But it's like, to me, I think the universe is not letting me anyway live life the way other people would. Even if I wanted to, it always pushes me out. So anyway, it pushed me out of Florida, it brought me here, and I watched my grandfather for 2 years. I basically watched him die. That sounds so morbid, but it's just true. And when the pandemic hit, he stopped moving, and that is what got to him. And he already had cancer and all of his stuff, he just didn't know it. And when he stopped moving, he just slowly broke down. And he just got very, very slow, and he slept most of the day. And then he went to get surgery to get cancer out, and he died. And I was teaching high school that day, and my cousin came in, like, right before I was starting my Zoom class and told me. So I'm in front of my students, like, and it was just the craziest thing. But I was listening to my grandpa's stories for 2 years, and I was listening to him regret not doing things. Not getting a master's degree, not doing this, not traveling as much. And yet he was still stubborn and insistent that I needed to get another teaching job and make sure that I had retirement build up and live life the way he lived it. And yet he lived life the way that he lived it, and he was not happy. He was not happy with like who he was. He didn't feel like he had a purpose at the end of his life, and he was processing all of that in front of me. I believe because I was meant to be there to hear it. So I could say to myself, like, I appreciate your advice. I appreciate mentors and people that have lived longer than me, but I'm going to choose to live life a different way because I don't want to be at the end of my life like wishing and hoping that I took these chances. So, time for a break. See you in a couple minutes.
The year is 2980, and we now know that death is not the end. A soul can be extracted from the recently deceased and be used to create a blue liquid called essence. It can bring a person back to life.
We'll get her back.
I hope so.
It's an expensive process used by the rich and powerful. The rest, they do what they can to survive.
Stay right there.
You told me you're hiding from some dangerous people.
Let's knock on the door. I spent the last year searching for the Deep Star. A bounty so big that the entire galaxy could be yours.
People have been looking for the Deep Star for years. They can't be found.
It's because they can't find the distress beacon. I know where it is.
If we find the Deep Star, we could get enough credits to bring Mom back.
Blast off.
Guys, we have company.
You can run, but you cannot hide. Prepare for impact.
I am now authorized to take action.
And now you die.
No!
What affects your credit? The answer can be many things. Let's take a look at a few of the most common factors and how they can impact your credit. Credit history. In order to have a credit score, you need to have open and active credit accounts. This gives you the opportunity to build a credit score and get approved for larger purchases such as a car or a home. So it's important to have a responsible record of debt repayment. Available credit and usage. The rule of thumb is to use 30% of your available credit to minimize the impact of debt on your credit score. In other words, the less credit you use, the better. Monthly on-time payments. By making sure your monthly payments are paid on time, you could boost your credit score. Late payments, however, may bring your score down. Errors on your credit report. Check your credit report regularly to make sure it's accurate. If there are any errors or signs of identity theft, report them immediately to the appropriate credit bureau. Applications for credit. If you're applying for credit, filling out several applications in a short amount of time may hurt your credit score. It's ideal to keep the applications to a minimum. However, there is an allowable shopping window for a mortgage. Remember, a good credit score could possibly save you in interest payments. If your credit score needs some improvement, however, consider starting with the basics mentioned here. And when you're ready to buy your dream home, give New American Funding a call. We'll help you find a home loan that works for you and your unique situation.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the last segment here. This episode's going by really quickly for me. Mental Melodies, Carmynn Bradley, once again, thank you. I was thinking about how my choice also to leave the teaching career was so very closely related. And it started around the same time when I was living with my grandpa, and then he died because I was teaching during the pandemic, right? And so most of it was through Zoom. And I was observing the way that life was changing for my students. And I taught primarily seniors at that time. So they were getting jobs and learning about themselves and hanging out with their friends more and still getting their schoolwork done. And I was like, this is such a great opportunity for our school system to completely change. And I was like all manic with my ideas, thinking that the principals and the superintendents were on the same page as me and that school would be different afterward, because I believe it takes up too much time. And that's partially why, like creatives like me were stifled back then, because you're controlled so much during that time that you have no autonomy. So that's why something I've mentioned, getting into college for me was hard, because I had to teach myself how to get structure when it was just handed to me before. And again, with life being experiment, like I just had to kind of figure it out. So anyway, I was really bitter that school just went back to the way it was. And I think this ties into what I was kind of starting to talk about at the beginning of the episode about how we respond to things. And we just let things maybe we sweep them under the rug. Maybe that's the image I'm looking for. And I think that's true because like it relates to what I was saying last week about what happened in my family a lot growing up. There was just so much crap that nobody would talk about but me. And then I was the one who was like in trouble because I talked about it. And it was like, how can you not? Like, why am I just gonna like let this happen and not talk about things, you know? And I think that essentially we're always just trying to maintain the status quo, even though evolution and life is supposed to change. And so I think we respond to things, like I say we, but whoever's in charge of responding to something like what happened in Las Vegas, or responding to the pandemic and like what's happening in the school system because of the pandemic, who's ever in charge of it, we're always in like problem solving mode, and then we solve the problem and then we move on, and there's no like thought about how it should change. And my brain is just like not with that. Like the pandemic to me was such an opportunity to literally change society. Like, why should people be working 60 to 80 hours a week? We shouldn't. So I went back to teaching high school, and it was again from 7 to 5, and it's such a brain blast, and I have no time or energy to be who I want to be or discover who I could be outside of this job. And it's this for the next forever, or I leave and try something else. And so I did. And I'm grateful for that. So I guess back to like this theory that life is an experiment. There have been some things that some recurring themes that I've been wanting to bring up about that. And one of them is that when we're changing, I believe we need to give ourselves the chance to like start over. And something I had to do, and I had to learn through therapy and self-exploration, writing, all this stuff, was that I have to give myself permission to change my mind, because I can be a very stubborn person. So I like set my mind to something, I'm going to do it. That's something my mom brought up about me. I think it was in my birthday card this year or something, because I just, recently was like, I'm going all in with what I want to do. I'm going to sing, I'm going to play music, I'm going to be an actress, I'm going to do all these things. And my mom was the one who was like, I know you're going to do it, because I've seen you say you're going to be a teacher. You became a teacher. You're going to get 2 master's degrees. You got them. You're going to become a therapist. You did. Anything that I say I'm going to do, I end up doing. But at the same time, I've switched a lot, right? And I have to give myself permission to say, like, I've lived this part of my life out. And this is something I talked about with my guest, Joshua Dagan, the author, photographer, all those things. And he was saying how like leaving being an author and now not jumping into, but building his photography career was very hard for him, because it was an identity shift. So tying it back to what I was saying about the ego, I think that that's where a lot of people get stuck, is they decide I am this thing, and then they feel they have to be that thing forever because it's a comfort zone, because it's safety. And often in our society, I think that's people derive their identities from their career. So it was really hard for me. I used to write like I am poems all the time when I was trying to discover who I was, and teacher was something that always came up for me. And it was really hard for me to walk away from that, because that's something that's like in my nature. I teach guitar now, even. I taught yoga. I've always had this like proclivity for teaching. And I think it's partially because I'm a learner. And so, I dove into guitar, and I dove into it with everything that I had, and teaching it helps me dive in further, and it helps me teach her and myself like music theory, and it keeps me up on all the stuff I'm working on. So anyway, I had to give myself permission to change my mind to be somebody different, and that's just such a beautiful thing for me, to be able to just be somebody that I haven't been. And that's something I've talked about a lot. Like, there are so many things that are to the core of who we are that I think we don't necessarily have to accept about ourselves, because even if we go back to early childhood and decide, like, I've always been that way since I was a little kid, I think you can still change it. I think you have power over like your neural network, over your decisions, over your emotions, but you have to decide to be that way. And then you have to have the time to do it. And that's something we were talking about over the break, where I'm mentioning this feeling of like I'm just constantly sprinting from one thing to the next and I don't want to. And that's often mostly when I'm driven by fear. And oftentimes it's because I'm afraid of like not having money. That's like my biggest thing. If I just had money, then I would take life slowly. And Maria was saying you sprint and there's always another sprint and you're always like looking toward the end. But if you've lived long enough, like that one sprint's not going to be the end. Like when I'm done with that one project, there's always going to be another project. So why shouldn't I take it slowly and enjoy the process? But you have to give yourself permission to do that. You have to face the fear that comes along with living that way. But the more that I've done that and the more that I've trusted, things come to me more, and I just feel better. Like that's, so there's an article out about me now on Canvas Rebel magazine that I haven't shared yet because there was one photo in there that I forgot to quote the person who took it, so I'm just going to have to tell him or buy him a Christmas present or something. But it's on Canvas Rebel magazine, and my responses were in writing, which is good for me because I'm a writer, and I read them back and I was like, they actually make sense. That's pretty cool. But I discover through writing and like through speaking out loud. And one thing I keep discovering over and over again is that like for the most part, what I'm doing, despite the fact that I do want to give back, and despite the fact I think a lot of the things that I'm saying are important for other people to hear, genuinely, I'm doing most of my things these days for me. My music is for me. My music has saved me from like compulsions. I've been a very compulsive, like addictive person throughout my entire life, even back to early childhood. Anytime now that I'm in a moment where I would revert back to some type of addiction, I play my guitar and I feel free, and I sing and I feel free. And that's all for me. That is 100% selfish. And even though I know there are messages in my songs that will help people, and the more music that I write, the more it will help people, just like Phoebe Bridges' songs helped me work through an emotional thing I was going through, and the Vampire song helped me work through something. At the end of the day, it's for me. And I believe that more people need to be finding relief for themselves. Because if you think to that theory, like the chain of screaming from How I Met Your Mother and how I brought all this cycle of violence up at the beginning, is that really then isn't the answer to find relief for yourself, to find happiness for yourself. Because if you're getting yelling from somebody and you're giving it back, then if more people are giving love and kindness and positivity or happiness, or they're just happy and they're doing what they want to do and they're glowing, they're going to give that energy to other people and it's going to continue to spread. But it's just so interesting to me because I think I've been fighting like being selfish my whole life and always wanting to like live for other people and thinking that that's the way to live. But I feel that I give more to the world now that I am doing what I want to do, that I'm spending my time more how I want to spend it. And I guess in a sense, non-selfishly, I want that for everybody, but I want that for everybody because I'm so sick of the world. I'm sick of people being angry and violent and like not having time to not be angry. Like if we weren't all in a rush and busy all the time, then you wouldn't be so frustrated that somebody was driving slow in front of you, because the person driving slow in front of you might be driving slow because they have a flat tire and they can't afford to get another tire, and you're mad at them because you're in a hurry and you don't know them. So you feel okay being mad at them because they're a stranger. But at the end of the day, like everybody has emotions and that ego and that shadow and challenges and things that are happening in their life, and they're all driving a certain speed because of what's going on in their day. And nobody cares because again, we don't have the time to think about those things or to like reflect on what kind of person we want to be. So this is my second ranty episode of the year. Find something that makes you happy today, and I will see you in a week.
Dance on melody.